Okay, in this video, I'm going to teach you how to do the knit stitch. So there's two main stitches in knitting, knit stitch and purl stitch. I'll do the purl in a different video. Once you've mastered both of those, you can do pretty much anything. Okay, however complicated something looks, it's really just a combination of those with possibly extra wraparounds and drops. Okay, most knitted garments require you to be able to knit and to purl. So to begin with, I've already cast on 20 stitches. All right, that's in a separate video, and I use the thumb cast on for this method. So I'm right-handed, so my stitches that I've already done are on my left-hand needle, and my right-hand needle is here and ready. Now, I'm the kind of person who likes to tuck one of her knitting needles under her arm in order to be able to control it a little bit better, so they won't see this needle move too much. So I'm going to take the tip of my needle and slide it under that first stitch. Okay, so that stitch is currently held on both needles. With the yarn, I'm going to wrap around the bottom stitch, so come under from left to right. Okay, so it's in between the two needles. I'm now going to slide towards the end, and the bottom needle comes underneath here, and then I can take that first stitch off the left hand needle, and I now have made my stitch on the right hand needle. And that is literally all we're going to do again and again and again. So my knitted needle goes in underneath the stitch. Okay, so that the stitch is held on both needles. The yarn comes round underneath from the left and over, and then I bring the bottom needle up under the stitch, and then I slide it off the left hand needle. Now I've got two stitches. I'm going to keep going. So in, under your stitch there, bring the yarn around from left to right underneath over the bottom needle, bring it in, and then slide it off the left hand needle. So you've now got 3 stitches made on the right hand side. So in, wrap it around from underneath left to right, take the bottom needle and take it under and then off. Into your stitch, wrap the bottom needle, take the bottom needle through and then off. So into your stitch, wrap it around, under there and off. Into your stitch, wrap it around, under there and off. So you can see now that I've got a few of my stitches here. You can see what it's beginning to work up like. I'm just going to go to the end of the row at my normal speed. Don't panic, because when I come back on the next row, I will go back to explain it step by step. But I want you to see how this stitch works up over a few rows without you having to spend half an hour of your life watching me do each stitch at a time. Okay, sometimes with your cast on row, if it's a little bit tight, this row can be a little bit tricky. So if you're just learning, try and keep your cast on row loose. Okay, obviously when you come to making actual things with it, you'll need to get your tension right. But if you make it too tight, then this first row is really tricky, trying to get your needle in there. So don't pull too tight when you're doing your cast on. And I'm working with an Aran weight yarn here, so I'm working with 5mm needles. All right, so it's a good size for a beginner. Obviously you get some very fine needles, but if you're just learning, the chunkier the better. I learned with a ball of double knit and a pair of, I think, 10mm chunky needles. It's a very gappy piece of work, but it's the longest scarf you've ever seen. And it got me there, so that's all that matters. So that's my first row. So the reason I sped through is because I need to show you what happens at the end of the row. So this needle now needs to go on my left. Okay, there is my first row of knitting. Okay, and my empty needle is going back on my right. Okay, I'm going to do the exact same thing now. Now, when we do repeated rows of knitting stitch like this, it's called garter stitch. So if you ever see a pattern and it talks about doing 20 rows of garter stitch, it just means knit every row. Okay, so the same thing. So you go into your first stitch, wrap your yarn underneath and over, bring your bottom needle through, and then take it off onto the other side. Needle in, yarn wrapped around, under there and off the end. Okay, the stitches that you've got on your left needle, feel free to spread out a bunch up as you need, okay? If they're getting a little bit tight, just scoot them up a little bit closer to the end. Try not to have them too close to the end because you don't want them all falling off. Drop stitches, they're a bit of a nightmare when you're learning to knit. So in the stitch, wrap your yarn around from underneath, bring your needle through the stitch and then slide it off. In, wrap around, underneath, slide it off. In, wrap around, underneath, slide it off. Okay, so every stitch is exactly the same, which is great as a learner because it means you can just go. Okay, you don't have to start with a scarf. Scarves are great, but they're quite long and they take a while. Okay, feel free to just, you know, make a square or just do a bit and then undo it and do something else. You follow a different video, you can learn a different stitch, or you can keep a collection of squares, sew them all together later on. Like I say, if you pick a thicker yarn and thicker needles, it will go quicker. But every stitch is just the same. We go in, we wrap around, underneath and off the end. In, wrap around, underneath and off the end. In, wrap around, underneath and off. I've got 2 more stitches to go. There's one, there's the last one. Okay, so I've now done 2 rows. Okay, so you can begin to see how this is going to look. I am going to do a little bit more yet, so you can you want to bear with me a bit longer. You might just be itching to go off. So what I'm going to show you now, just before I start my next row, is a really common mistake. So if you look here, what sometimes happens is if I take my yarn to the back, it looks like I've got 2 stitches here. And lots of people try and knit into those as 2 stitches and then they get really confused because they don't have 20 stitches anymore, okay? So one thing to do is when you're learning, and if you're doing anything important that's taking a lot of time, is count your stitches every row, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. That looks like 21. The other thing, and the easiest way to fix this, is that when you're doing a knit stitch, your yarn should always be at the front. And when I pull that back to the front, those loops disappear and there's the stitch that I actually want. So if you're knitting along and you realise that your stitch count is out, if you've got too many stitches, that's the most common mistake that people make as a beginner. Okay, if you make sure your yarn is always at the front of the needle before you start, then you will not have that problem. Okay, if you've got it at the back, it looks like you've got an extra stitch. Okay, so that's the most common error that when I've taught people to knit that they make and get their stitch count wrong. Okay, so I'm going to do another row. Again, exactly the same. At this point, you might decide you've seen enough and you want to run off and have a go. Please feel free. Okay, the only reason I'm showing you another row is just so that I can show you a little bit more of how this looks knitted up. So every time I'm going into the stitch, wrapping my yarn around, bringing my needle under and sliding the first stitch off. In, around, under, off. In, around, under, off. In, around, under, off. In, around, under, off. Now I'm going to just pause a second here because sometimes the doorbell goes. It's really annoying. If possible, if there's someone else in your house, please let them answer the doorbell if you're in the middle of a row. Okay, so when you come back to it, okay, there are a number of things that could have happened. So number one, I caught my needle under there for a second then. I might think I've got an extra stitch. So please check that your count on both stitches adds up to what you started with so that I don't accidentally throw in a new stitch there. Sometimes we put things down and we don't really think about how we put them down. And then you've got to work out which way round you are. So first of all, a couple of clues. If you look at the bottom of what's underneath my needle, you can see that this is a little bit deeper than this one. So this is the side I was knitting with. But also when I pick it up, my yarn should be attached to the needle I was working onto. So the one that I'm putting my stitches onto is where my yarn is. Okay, if you accidentally pick them up the wrong way round, the yarn is in the wrong place for you to do the next stitch. Okay, things you will learn as a knitter is interruptions are really annoying. So yeah, but that's what happens if the doorbell goes or someone interrupts you. That's how we fix that. So I'm going to carry on my row into the stitch, wrap it around, bring that under, slide it off, and continue like that until the end. Okay, so in, around, under, off. Again, you're going to be slow to start with. This is brand new. You're going to be trying to figure out how to get your needle under, right? Finally get it in. Then you'll, oh, hang on, which way around do I go? Always under from left to right across the top. Then if you're too tight, trying to get this bit underneath becomes a bit tricky. So don't worry, just take your time with it, and then sliding it off. It's always a bit scary, because what if you've not done it right and you lose your stitch? So don't worry that you're slow. We're all slow when we learn. We all make mistakes when we learn. Don't worry if it ends up with holes, okay? Or if it doesn't end up straight. The fact is, you've had a go. You're trying to do this from a video, so you've not got somebody next to you saying, oh, you've dropped that stitch. Just take your time, forgive yourself. We can always pull it back and start again. The only thing downside of knitting compared to crochet is that if we pull it back, it's a bit heartbreaking, because sometimes that can be a lot of work. I will show you in another video when we get a bit more advanced what to do if you've made mistakes. Okay, but that is how knitting every row, so garter stitch, shows up, and it actually looks the same from both sides. Okay, you just got these lovely little ridges. So it is a nice double-sided fabric, a very easy one for beginners, and anything that's straight, you're good to go. Okay,